SuckerPunch nowadays is known as the developers that brought us the samurai adventure Ghost of Tsushima. And now, since writing this script, Ghost of Yotei. But what if I told you when I was a kid, one of my favourite games of the PS2 generation was also made by SuckerPunch Productions, Sly Cooper and The Honor Among Thieves. As a child, I never got to pick what game arrived. As a result, I only ever played the third installment. So today I thought we would do a total retrospective and look at the complicated history of Sly Cooper. Courtesy of Colin Moriarty at IGN, we have a fantastic article on the history of SuckerPunch and how they came to be. The founders met whilst working at Microsoft. Brian Fleming, Chris Zimmerman, Bruce Oberg, Darryl Plank, Tom Saxton, and Kathy Saxton. In particular, Fleming, Zimmerman, and Oberg are the three core founders and visionaries of the company that still work there today. Those three began working at Microsoft in the late 80s, which was before the boom of Windows 95 during its MS-DOS phase. But it was around this boom that moving on became a possibility. In this same IGN article, founder Chris Zimmerman had this to say. We were in the same group, and then we kind of worked together off and on over the next 8 or 9 years. It started with me. I started getting disenchanted with my life at Microsoft, and was thinking about doing something new. On a day out, seeing a re-release special edition of Star Wars in the spring of 1997, there he began to prod his friend about the possibility of a very different future. Hey, have you ever thought about doing something different? Zimmerman recalled asking. I kind of had this semi-rough idea, I don't know how formed it was at that point, of doing a game company, and luckily Brian thought that sounded interesting. Bruce had experience with games but wouldn't join till later on once Zimmerman and Fleming had already left to do their own thing. He had the following to say. I spent all my time playing in arcades in college, Oberg admitted. I put so much money into Stargate and Defender. I'm pretty good at it actually. But it was funny, because I'm just a little bit older than these guys, so I never really hit the console stuff until basically the Nintendo 64 came out. Oberg's obsession with his N64 was what got their collective minds ticking about moving into development in the first place. He brought his N64 into work when it launched stateside in the fall of 1996, and the three men would play its launch games, Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings. Somewhat taken aback by how far gaming had come, especially for PC-minded folks like them. It was before any of us had gaming PCs, right? Zimmerman asked rhetorically. I mean, I was playing games at that point, but it was all 2D stuff. Railroad Tycoon and whatever. So seeing this consumer bit of electronics that was actually doing 3D stuff was cool. I mean, I'd played Wolfenstein and Doom and all those games, but somehow it was different, you know? Mario was different. Oberg and Fleming had similar experiences, one more with arcades, and later home computers, but also for Fleming, the SNES with Star Fox and Link to the Past, and while later on Oberg will also say Ocarina of Time, it goes beyond what game they played and more the idea of creating them. And at the same time, they were seeing a lot of their colleagues leave for the dot-com boom. But as they didn't want to deal with venture capitalists and the general realities of running an actual business, the simple idea of being able to focus on just the technical and creative was much more appealing, especially with the industry standard of having publishers do all that business work. Brian Fleming said the following. The idea of having a publisher was actually really appealing to us because it meant that we didn't need to do a deal with marketing and sales and all the things we just don't think are our strengths. We didn't want to do that part, and video games had this business model that let us focus on the technical and creative and not focus on the stuff that was not our background. I mean, we were creators of things, not people who made our career selling things. Fast forward, they're now ready to take the rather intimidating jump. It became a matter of deciding what platform to release on, and while they loved games like Abe's Odyssey, they said the following. We were also terrified by it because we were ill-equipped as relatively inexperienced creatives. We had a lot of technical horsepower, but we weren't artists. We weren't filmmakers, Fleming admitted. It was really scary to see how far games had come in like one jump. It went from effectively Super Mario to Abe's Odyssey in terms of art production, and you're like, wow. So given their strengths as a group, it made more sense to go with the Nintendo 64. But this made sense for more than one reason. And I think we looked also at just from a practical standpoint, at when we started in 97, to market for those consoles. Zimmerman continued. You looked at PC, there were 5,000 games you could buy, literally. And if you looked at the PlayStation, there were 500. And if you looked at the N64, it was more like 30. And we're like, okay, let's go jump in the pool that only has 30 other swimmers. Now, they needed a name for their studio, and one day Fleming went to Zimmerman's house with a list of names. Zimmerman's wife reviewed their written file of could-be Microsoft project codenames and some other names. Hey, these are all okay, the men remember her saying. Well, not SuckerPunch, so she drew a line through it. The two men, thinking that the advice of a 35-year-old woman is the exact opposite direction they really needed to go, since they were making games for a young, largely male audience, decided that if she didn't like it, that's the name they wanted. SuckerPunch Productions was born. Their first game, codenamed Puzzle Factory, was inspired by the classic PC game The Incredible Machine. But it wasn't long they realised they couldn't make what they were used to at Microsoft. Something was very different when it came to dealing with Nintendo. If you went to Microsoft and, quoting Fleming, hey, we want to make apps for Windows, you'd be like, hey, give us $400 and you can have the MSDN, CD-ROM, and we'll give you all the stuff. We'll get you compilers. Go, make games. Welcome to the family of making Windows games. Nintendo did not have the same mindset, so he was completely stunned when Nintendo stonewalled him, telling him he needs approval before being given access to a dev kit, leaving Fleming frustrated. There's a reason behind Nintendo's logic here, and I'm sure any of you have looked at the physical Nintendo games and seen the official Nintendo seal of quality. Its original intent was designed to prevent things such as the ET problem for the Atari 2600, causing the near collapse of the gaming market as a whole. So this was their way of saying games with this logo are checked and licensed by Nintendo. This includes making sure it works on their hardware. Today, on the official Nintendo website, it's known as the following. The seal of quality guarantees that you have purchased Nintendo quality, and you can be certain that everything will work together without problems. We can't say this guarantees quality. After all, we've all seen the Nintendo eShop for the Switch 1. Nintendo told them to create a prototype and pitch their game to them. So they did just that with Windows, and used their closest PC joysticks to make it feel as close to the N64 as possible. They pitched it, having no idea if what they made was good. In quotes, "We were a drunken guy walking across the street with traffic is what we were," Zimmerman said, laughing. It all worked out as Nintendo let them purchase dev kits for the N64. By this point, SuckerPunch had a dozen team members and a game called Sprocket. This would be known to us as Rocket Robot on Wheels. We're funding this, we're just building a prototype, because as guys from our background, it was like, well, that's how you show you're serious. That's how you show people what this really is. You just show them the thing, right? We'll just build out the first world in Rocket, and then we can show people, and then they'll take us seriously. And they'll know that we're going to be able to do this, and that there's a game at the end of it. With that mindset, and nearly a year into self-funding this game, there was one key problem. They didn't have a publisher. The founders said, we pitched to everybody. This even includes Sony, despite the current version of the game being for the N64. So the plan was to have Sony port the game to the PlayStation 1, and then find someone else to publish to the Nintendo 64. However, Sony did not want to do that. This is a time where console exclusives were the way to go, so publishing on their biggest competitor wasn't an option. That, and alongside the fact this was the era of the mascot. It was competing with the likes of Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon, so it would be difficult to market the game with so many alternatives, be it on Sony or Nintendo. It wasn't all negatives though. Grady Hunt, a producer at Sony who worked SuckerPunch in the early days, had this to say about the demo. It was super interesting from a technology standpoint. He continued, I know this is not going to sound like a big deal now, but back then they had this very cartoony game, but they had real physics in it. It looked and felt very different. I think one of the things, at least to me, that made SuckerPunch feel special compared to the other teams, although they were really inexperienced at that time, was that they had a lot of creativity on the programming side. That was pretty interesting. With Sony saying no, they went to many other publishers like Acclaim and Activision, but Fleming said, we didn't know what we were doing. They realised that what they had from publishers wasn't as positive as they thought, saying things like, this is amazing and cool, come back in a few months and show us your progress. Laughing in this interview, they remark, they don't say no. The hope for the publishers is that in a couple months' time, you've addressed a couple of their concerns, but the reality was the publisher model, even more so back then, was the game was greenlit by the company from the beginning, or it was possibly picked up to be localized for another region, and that was it. And here we are with this game that was sort of self-funded, which is weird, and there just wasn't a way. We had to have a publisher. There was no indie scene, so we were sort of stuck. We were in this weird spot where we hadn't realized, and our mental model was, hey, if we fund it, we're going to get better royalties. We actually thought we were using our assets. With E3 coming up, it was vital to get people seeing their game, and they were speaking with a couple more publishers. THQ was the one looking most likely, but fell apart weeks before E3. Then they spoke with EA, which was an odd deal to say the least. They didn't want the game, they wanted the developers. So the offer was, here's a big check, get rid of Sprocket, and start working on a PS2 title for us. It was a tempting offer, and the founders said this was another brush with failure, because they decided to not go with EA. SuckerPunch chose to go to E3 without a publisher, and did it entirely on their own. Luckily, their past experience at Microsoft helped them with product launches. They made their own press kits, documentation, and more, emailed as many print and online press outlets, and even rented a hotel room near E3 to conduct their own preview appointments. And without a publisher, there was a chance this game would never even be released. But something worked because they netted themselves a few positive articles in magazines such as Next Generation. Think there's nothing but poorly made Mario clones for the N64? You haven't seen this platformer. The game's art style was created with LucasArts' Peter Chan, who worked on Monkey Island 2, eventually going to work on films such as Ants, The Phantom Menace, and Harry Potter as a storyboard and concept artist. Working with SuckerPunch art director Dev Madden to give us this wonderful appeal while also being very representative of games you'd expect to see on the Nintendo 64. Chris Zimmerman said in this article, the top shelf N64 games right now are all pretty much maxing out the N64. You're not going to see games look a lot better. Thanks to the article you've just seen, it got the attention of a publisher we haven't mentioned yet, Ubisoft. Today it feels almost impossible to not know who they are just from Assassin's Creed alone, but back then their main game was Rayman. And with their help they got Rocket, Robot on Wheels out the door and onto store shelves. How did it do? Critics were quite positive, but it was not a commercial success. Fleming described the audience response as tepid. So what actually is this game? It's a physics-based platformer. You are a robot on wheels whose job is to perform maintenance and rescue the theme park from the clutches of a criminally minded raccoon. I played this game for myself, and while it's nothing I would go crazy over, it plays really well, and something as simple nowadays as the grab feature feels close to something you would see generations ahead of it. It seems there was some magic behind the idea of a mischievous raccoon, because that was who was going to be the protagonist of their next title. Learning from the frustrating experience of Rocket Robot on Wheels, they decided to approach a publisher first. Fleming said the following, at the time we felt that if you looked at the successful platformers, the ones that really broke out and became iconic, 100% of them were published by a console stakeholder. The console owner was the publisher. So they approached someone who they spoke with during the development of their first game, and that was Sony. Perk to partnering with Sony was that it removed a worry which was porting the game for multiple systems. This would have taken staff that they didn't have the numbers for.
We're most of us in our 20s, and there were only 15 of us on the team. And so it was a terrific kind of boot camp where you got to see into every other department, all of this collaboration, and we learned as we went because most of us really didn't know how to build a video game at the time.
This is still during the mascot era, but deciding on a protagonist can be simpler than you think. The sight gag of a raccoon putting on a mask somehow seemed super funny to us. That was it. That was the decision to make Sly Cooper right there. Making a game for kids and about a thief had them worrying about the implications it could have. So in a PlayStation blog, Chris Zimmerman wrote a piece looking back over the last 20 years and said this about the creation of Sly. If you make a game for kids about a master thief and his friends pulling off crazy heists, you can't help but worrying about the message you're sending to the youth of the world is, hey kids, stealing is cool, which would be the worst public service announcement ever. Eventually we decided that Sly was such a skillful thief that he only steals from other thieves, and explained this rule in the first 5 minutes of the game. We crossed our fingers and managed to not trigger a tweener crime wave. On a behind the scenes video on a demo disc courtesy of Oxybellis, they talk about creating the art style going in. They wanted it to be like a cartoon, but with a step towards realism, which led them to the cel shading style we see today. Everything had to look painted in the background.
We very early on wanted to make a game that looked and felt like a cartoon, but was one step closer to realism rather than flat and graphic. We started experimenting with different ways we could bring this character to life, cell shading, how to make it feel like a cartoon but still feel like a great 3D game.
We want it to actually look like it was inked and painted, and we want the backgrounds to be, really lush and have a painted look, so it looks like it's a living animated episode that you've been thrown into.
When you look at the game, initially, the first thing that draws you in is the beautiful art style and lush, very, very lush look of the environments. But when you actually play the gameplay itself is lush as well.
Initially, Sly looked much more like the raccoon from Rocket.
Oh, the big guy, the original, the progenitor.
But gradually evolved into the character we know today. And animating him, you can see they added every bit of sneaky athletic thievery possible.
He's really rearing back to ease his foot forward, trying to keep all his weight back so his foot falls softly on the ground, and really try to hone his personality through subtleties in the movement.
Is we wanted Sly to feel really agile. We wanted him to feel like Sly could do the most amazing physical feats. You want to let the player of the game feel like they're a thief. Not like a real thief, like you wish thieves were.
After all, they had a rule. You pick whichever option is more thief-like. Creating a character like Carmelita is important to the story, because the player needs someone, especially in Sly's case, to tell them that they're doing something wrong. In a developer commentary, while covering the game, Nate had this to say about it.
So what inspired Carmelita? Carmelita is a composite of two characters. Well, the first thing, right, is that we just wanted to have somebody saying, hey, Sly, you're a thief. Because otherwise, you're not really making off with a lot of money here. You're stealing a lot of keys and you're stealing back your Thevius Racoonus from other thieves. So unless we had a law enforcer telling you explicitly you were breaking the law, it didn't really seem like you were breaking the law, which you are. Anyhow, Carmelita is the product of really wanting to combine two characters. One is this inspector character from the series, who's a detective that hounds you, and it's pretty standard, right? It's sort of like Javert and Jean Valjean. A lot of these, works of fiction that are about a criminal character have this tireless cop that hounds them all the time and their relationship. And the second character that we were pretty overtly riffing on was this federal marshal and a bank robber, and they fall in love, but they can't be in love because they're on opposite sides of the law. So Sly and Carmelita, they have that thing kind of going on where she is both his true nemesis and love interest at the same time.
There was a lot of pressure going in. Many of the best titles were action-adventure, so they knew that you couldn't just excel at one thing.
Primarily what I was doing was laying out these challenges on the first game that were kind of platform sequences. And there were just two designers, myself and this other guy, Rob. And it was, frankly, kind of a creative competition. He would deliver a level, and it was really good. And then I would say, oh man, I'm gonna work late. I'm gonna make a level that's even better. And we just kept trying to one-up each other, which of course, I think led to a better game. Thank you, Rob, for constantly one-upping me. I appreciate it.
Everything had to look, sound, and play as thief-like as possible. Whether it's emphasizing the toon cell shading with an outline, the subtle sound cues as you cross a ledge, or the animation itself. That's how I thought I looked when sneaking down the stairs as a kid for my 5 AM biscuit raid. That's cookies to the Americans in the room. Designing the levels, the team had an idea, and that was to design the first level last. The reason behind this is that with everything they've learned, toolsets refined, they can make the best level to start the player off and really hook them in. That caused one key problem. Chris Zimmerman, in a PlayStation blog looking back, said this. Then, after it was done, we held a focus test with real players, and it was a complete disaster. No one could make it past the first level. We'd been playing the game for years, so we thought the tricky jumping and sneaking techniques we had added were great, but new players were completely lost. For anyone who played the game, this was the Snowy Panda level, and yeah, it's not the easiest to start with. Expanding further, he had this to say. This caused mild panic. We were only months away from shipping the game and didn't have enough time to fix all the problems with the first world. Luckily, inspiration struck. We could change the order of the worlds, and that's what we did. We invented a new move to learn on the Panda King world. The internet just reminded me of this ability was invisibility. Moved it from the 1st to the 4th in the order of worlds, and managed to escape the mess we'd made of things. Lighting is a really important aspect of the game, which is something they've changed 3 times during development. In some more developer commentary, they talk about the difficulty of having night lighting but also keeping the colours intact to keep the game vibrant. The guards need torches, but the player also needs to be able to see, and that was not an easy balance.
My goal is to making it not dark, but give it the night sense, and especially like this level is interior, but you still get the night light.
When you collect the key on this level or any of the other levels, you'll notice that the background kind of completely goes dark, and we kind of go into this letterbox and show you this animation of Sly picking the key, and it's kind of funny. We use this alternate lighting model to darken everything else at this very base level. It was a weird kind of just hack feature I put in to just darken everything. But then you have to say, well, I don't want to darken Sly because he's the one collecting the key. So Sly is actually marked as like, don't darken me, but he's the only thing in the whole game that's marked that way. Oh, and the key is marked as don't darken me. But everything else in the game gets darkened by this alternate lighting model.
As Bentley guides a player and is one of the characters you hear talking the most, they knew they had to make him playable. But it had to be suited to him, being the tech guy. So they went with a visible manifestation of his hacking powers. Originally looking at games like Battlezone from 1980, but ended with a more Tron look.
I'm sure you're asking yourself, what exactly is Bentley doing there? He's typing. So this is, of course, a virtual manifestation of Clockwork's security system.
Right, he's hacked into...
He's hacking in. So Clockwork has hidden some secrets in those little yellow things, which I think are supposed to be 5 1/4-inch floppy disks.
Cubes.
We're awfully deep for those.
Yeah, well, it's a virtual representation. So, and he's hidden them in layers of security, which Bentley is madly destroying by typing and shooting little bullets out.
I could cover all the small decisions they made developing the game, thanks to this video where someone compiled all the developer commentary. But it wouldn't make the best video, so I'll link this in the description below.
Finally, the secret police file I've been searching for all these years. With this, I could avenge my family and regain possession of our most valued treasure.
He has 2 buddies who are Bentley and Murray, and they met at the orphanage, and the reason Sly is there is because when his family book was stolen, so was the life of his father. Now that he is an experienced thief with his crew, it almost feels like a rite of passage to get the family heirloom back. After all, Sly is the last member of the Cooper clan, a long line of master thieves who only steal from other criminals, and in this family book, it contains techniques and secrets developed by all of them. The people who stole the book and murdered Sly's father are a group of criminals known as the Fiendish Five, and all of them have a piece of the Thevius Racoonus, which, in case anyone was wondering, is fake Latin, that the creators often forget how to spell. At the age of 16, the gang leave the orphanage with one key objective: recover all the pages of the book and avenge the Cooper family. But who are the members of the Cooper gang? Bentley is the classic computer nerd. Anything Sly does wouldn't be possible without him, whether it's planning, getting intel to feed you, and obviously tutorials from the get-go. Murray is described as someone who wants to do everything Sly does, but none of the abilities. He wants to be sneaky and agile, even though he is the gentle but hulking brute of the group. The first mission is to infiltrate the Interpol headquarters in Paris. Here, there's a file containing all the information they need on the Fiendish Five. So they set out to do their key objective from when they left the orphanage. It's here where we see Carmelita, and judging from their interactions, they've met before. It turns out the Cooper gang had done a string of heists to prove themselves before learning about the document at Interpol. When you think of Saturday morning cartoons or the hero shows of the time, the episode splash cards make it feel even more like that. And it's not just the main character, but the villains too, each one designed to be menacing but equally goofy. And that is seen from the street level thugs all the way to the big bad of that area. And it's even more clear when it comes to the boss fights. The members of the Fiendish Five are Sir Rayleigh, a frog pirate, Mugshot, an American gangster, Ms. Ruby, who's a mystic alligator from Haiti, and the Panda King, who is an explosive expert from China. And yes, you counted correctly, that's only 4. The 5th is the leader, a mechanical owl named Clockwork. After a series of successful heists taking down members of the Five, it leads to Clockwork's lair. Carmelita was already held captive, leaving Sly to rescue her and for a temporary truce, in order to take down Clockwork once and for all. It's here that it's revealed that they're also a master thief, but was bitter and jealous after being constantly outshined by the Cooper clan. So, turning themselves into a literal machine, then slaying Sly's father and stealing the book to prove that they would be nothing without it, which of course isn't true. It ends, as always, with all good Saturday morning cartoon vibes, with them winning. Carmelita agrees to give them a 10-second head start, so he gives her a kiss and then cuffs her to the rail, ensuring that the Cooper gang can get away. But it's here a second game is confirmed, because after all the credits are done, one of Clockwork's eyes opens. It seems somehow Clockwork has returned. Sorry, the reference was right there.
Oh, this is bad.
Sly Cooper, he's one cunning, devious, Thevius Racoonus. Rated E for everyone.
Sly Cooper and the Thievius Racoonus released on the 24th of September 2002. Critically, it performed well, with a Metacritic average of 86. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an earlier snapshot to see what it looked like 14 years ago. As the user reviews tend to get continually updated, it's harder to gauge how the game felt at the time. For example, some will go back and praise the game purely on nostalgia. Others will go back and rate it 0, because why not apparently. Reviews at the time, however, had a lot of positive to say, whether it's the lovely tuned graphics adapting on the platforming genre, with its breaking up of the gameplay with the odd shooting or racing level, and unique bosses that at the very least give you a different idea every time. It isn't short of competition either, because PlayStation came out swinging in this new generation for the platformer genre that Nintendo and Sega were seen as the kings of. Just a year before this, Jak and Daxter Precursor Legacy came out. Then Sly 1, and shortly followed by Ratchet & Clank. All new IPs, and all in their own right, a 3D platformer. And if you'd like to see me cover any of these beloved franchises, say in the comment section. The main criticism stemmed from the lack of difficulty. Despite that, it's still fun, unless you're one of those players that needs to be a glutton for punishment to enjoy a game, and the other was that the game simply isn't long enough to justify the $40 price tag. Along with the fact the added gameplay for collecting bottles or more moves or time trials isn't enough compared to the addition of new worlds and levels. From GameSpot in particular, this comment feels very of its time, stating that rental may be a better option if cost is a deciding factor for you. Imagine that! Rental! I mean, they're right. It's just weird to see it recommended. You can also see my full gameplay of this on my stream's VOD channel, as I thought I would upload my complete gameplay, no commentary, no camera, and my total playthrough was about 6 hours, not including any revisits or extra collecting I may have done in my downtime. The how long to beat average was set around 7 hours, but of course some beat this much quicker, and others much longer, depending if they're an aspiring speedrunner or a 100% trophy hunter. So depending on how you value your cost to game time theory, which I personally despise, there may be some merit to GameSpot's rental idea. How did the game sell? The dreams of the team were to sell 500,000 units to justify the making of a sequel, according to Fleming. But they doubled that, selling close to 1 million units. Playing the first game of the series, you can see the building block of what's to come, and that's certainly true. I have the weird approach of playing the third game first, so going in, I wondered if I could objectively give my thoughts on this game, without it being tarred with that classic feeling that you get whenever you go back to an older game in a series you know. Where are my pretty little quality of life features? Thinking about games that came out around this time and prior, what we have is almost a hybrid between Super Mario 64 with its more hub-world sections, but also Crash Bandicoot, where instead of being a crazy little devil crashing your way through your path, you're carefully treading around guards and spotlights where you can. The general flow of gameplay will have you load into an area. You'll need a certain number of keys, which can be acquired on numerous paths to unlock the next stage of that episode, which sometimes happens again, and then after that you reach the final boss of that area. Generally speaking, the gameplay is rather fun, even more so if you're a fan of an alternate take on Crash Bandicoot. The game in general doesn't stick around long enough for you to get tired of it. My playthrough, as I said before, clocked in on 6 hours, so my experience is similar to that of the common criticisms of this game. Now, you remembered we have the Cooper gang. The other two, for the most part, aren't playable, but there are a couple cases where you can. Just nothing like Sly. Murray has a racing level with his van, which he adores, and the other, while not playing as him, he is the focus. Yeah, it's an escort mission. He has to get the job done, but you need to be around to cover him, so you can almost be there like an Overwatch sniper, which isn't the most fun, especially with how brutal the health is in this game, and the fact you can friendly fire, which you know I did, at least a few times, makes it rather painful. Bentley gets their own mission as well, very similar to some of the Sly missions where you have a twin-stick shooter. You either love that kind of gameplay or you don't. I'm typically in the don't here, but it's so few and far between that it serves as a nice breakaway from the main gameplay, which is a theme with this series throughout. Something that stands out to me the most, however, is how each boss is different. It feels nice going in not knowing whether I'm going to do a rhythm section, leading them like a bull into fencing, or just straight up beating them up. But the key here is that it's always different, and that's the strength. Thematically, visually, mechanically, each boss feels unique. One thing that makes me compare this to Crash Bandicoot is the health situation. I'm not sure why I worded that like an angry YouTuber. I can already see the thumbnail. I digress. When you get hit, that's it. Time to restart the bit. However, if you have a lucky horseshoe, much like Aku Aku and Crash Bandicoot, you will be protected for that one hit. And besides the actual stealth section of the game, the majority of the interactions with the enemies is looking for a timing window and then striking between swings or bursts of flames. Simple, but again, arcadey. Overall, I really enjoyed this game. I do wonder if this game was longer, I'd feel the same way. Would I seek more variety in missions, or would simply a new set with the occasional break be enough, which is this game's standard? Or would simply a new world with a usual formula be enough? The theme is something I truly love. Being the guy who sneaks in, cracks the safe, and leaves a calling card. I was like, yeah dude, that's me. Sly Cooper. Just a vibe. It's just a vibe I can enjoy as a whole. And much like what we covered in the behind the scenes of this game, the cat and mouse relationship of Sly and Carmelita only enhances it, because otherwise I'd feel like a complete good guy. Whereas we're kind of adjacent, but not on that edgy beat them up and leave them for the police kind of way. I don't have much else to say about this because while I would say the older critiques of this game are completely valid, maybe I would have looked at this differently if I paid full price back then. But now being able to go to the used game shop, get the whole HD Trilogy for $30 or in the PSN store and pick this up for 10. It's hard to hold it to the same standard, so please bear it in mind when I give my opinion. However, it turns out there was some cut content, so let's take a look. Thanks to NeoGamer for re-uploading this video. We have a developer commentary on early prototypes of the game and even some cut content in the early Sly 1 footage. While you can see the evolution into how it became what we know it, it looks much closer to the older style platformer such as Crash Bandicoot. The original first level was going to be a water one, with you piloting a submarine, changing the propellers to fit through various gaps. While I'm sure it would have been fun, I have a vendetta against water levels, especially in later Crash games, with an exception being the water temple from Ocarina of Time. Sly's Cane was originally going to be a tool with multiple purposes, besides the traverse and hit we have now. But it was going to turn into other tools such as helping uncover a hidden maze, which you can see on the screen. But in that same video there is a section which shows something they worked on for 8 months, based on Monaco. This was for Sly 2, which showed an early look at the building blocks for the rest of the series, and you can see a huge evolution of gameplay from the original. Which brings us to Sly 2, Band of Thieves. I'm interrupting this video to briefly tell you about my Patreon. I work a lot, and these videos take a lot of time and work. So if you want these videos to be released a little quicker and allow me to give these projects a little more time, go check it out. One of the big focuses in this game compared to the first was making it about doing something rather than going somewhere.
This game we really wanted it a lot more to be about doing something rather than just going somewhere. And as a result, one of the things we really focused on this game was to really work on the AI.
Traditionally, 3D platformers were exactly that. It was more about getting from point A to point B, but in a more linear sense, with little freedom in how you get there. Ratchet & Clank expanded by doing multiple paths, but ultimately still following a path compared to a game like Crash Bandicoot, where through tight 3D platforming, they simply get to the end of this objective, which makes you understand their biggest change in direction. Instead of the old, which was a hub world then going down a series of paths for a key to unlock a gate to take you to the next linear path, which then takes you to a boss. Now you're in a series of smaller overworlds where objectives are all in places you can freely explore, which adds some interesting design challenges for the developer, because to an extent, you don't know exactly the path a player will take to get the job done. Another part of this was working on the AI, and no, not that one, making them all round deadlier and smarter than before.
Sly is able to handle different classes of enemies in the game, and it tends to be that the ones that are dangerous to him walk the streets and are patrolling and guarding the areas.
The guards are just more intelligent and more sophisticated, which makes getting from point A to point B in the world both unique and interesting for every player who goes through it. No two players will have the same experience traveling through the Sly world.
The idea behind this game was making it like a Hollywood heist film.
When I say heist, I mean like classic Hollywood heist film kind of heist, where the last third of the film was all about this big, spectacular, elaborate crime involving many thieves working together to do something huge.
Everything you do, whether it's gathering intel, sabotaging, or more, it will bring you to that big day where everyone has to come together to the big heist for a piece of clockwork. Now you can play as all the members of the gang, whether it's Murray and his brawling, or Bentley and his hacking. And the use of the environment changes how you interact with the world, as neither of those have Sly's nimble athletic ability, which you can just see from how they walk and sneak alone. Making the world itself, the intentions are for them to be like a jungle gym. Never will the world feel more important than the player, but give you agency to feel athletic and stealthy no matter what you're doing. We all know what makes a great story, and in the same behind the scenes they talk about the diverse cast of big bads, and that Sly will be chasing around the whole game.
Dimitri is this lounge lizard who runs a seedy nightclub.
He's a master forger / counterfeiter.
Look, I'm sure that two cats in a bag like us can work something out.
The coolest part about Dimitri is how he talks. English is his second language, and he learned all his English from watching hip-hop videos.
Have you no vision? Are you hearing what I mean to you?
Described as someone who learned to speak English through hip-hop videos, they let the way he talks, the way he moves, and looks tell you everything about his character. I personally loved Gene Bison. It's a dude whose sole job was cleansing the frontier, but froze 100 years ago, so when he thaws out, he has the same mission. Everyone has these elaborate plans for the artifacts of clockwork, but not Gene. Dude just attaches it to a club and uses it to take down a whole mess of trees, like he's trying to build Tarrytown in Breath of the Wild. Behind the scenes, they seem to have a perfect melting pot of creativity and ideas, which is how we got a game like this. And with creativity a little unhinged, I'm just gonna leave this clip here.
I think one of the real big strengths at SuckerPunch is it's a very creative team that tends to push themselves.
What's this for right here? That is to make sure that Nate is working.
It's always been a collaborative effort all the way through the pipeline. And the pipeline is set up like that specifically so that everybody gets their chance to inject themselves into what they're doing.
Hey, how's it going?
We've been really lucky in that we've just gotten really great people on board to do the kinds of things that we need to do, making a really great game.
Well, we're crazy.
Do you want any dialect or anything to make it appeal to the European gaming market? Raccoons, squirrels, turtles. Sly Cooper 2 is the finest game you'll ever play this year.
Stop.
The game immediately starts you in a heist for clockwork parts in a museum in Cairo. You're told pretty quickly about this being Bentley's first time in the field, which alludes to the fact you'll be able to play as more members of the Cooper gang. While you're in the museum, however, you are jumped by returning love interest Carmelita and Interpol constable Naylor, who are currently staking out the place after the museum had been robbed the night before. That's right, someone had beat them to it. It's here Naylor drops the name of the Claw Gang, as the robbery had all of their hallmarks. This left Sly wondering if she let that name slip on purpose to put the Cooper gang on a mission to recover these parts. And for those who didn't play the first game, or needed a reminder, we get a little backdrop as to who Clockwork is. And that's a rival of Sly's family. Jealous of their talents, of thievery, they become bitter rivals. And consumed by this, swaps out their body with mechanical parts, making himself immortal. From there, you and the gang will be travelling around the world reclaiming pieces of clockwork, which has been distributed amongst the members of the Claw gang. Dimitri and his nightclub in Paris using tail feathers to print money. But no matter how catchy a song is, he still caught the end of Sly's cane, being arrested by Carmelita in the process. Rajan, a rags to riches story set in India where through selling spice tries to buy his way into royalty. It's in the second chapter of his story where you're betrayed by Naylor and suddenly Sly's suspicions from the beginning are realised to some extent, as both he and Rajan are arrested by the Contessa and Naylor at the end of a lengthy fight, and it doesn't stop there. Naylor had a photo of Sly and Carmelita dancing from the previous episode and used it to have her arrested too. Contessa, who despite being a member of Interpol, it's actually just a front.
She decides to open up this rehabilitation clinic for criminals. But wait, it's just a scam, because it's really up front so that she can hypnotize criminals into telling her where they've hidden their loot.
You're an ignorant child playing dress-up in his father's legacy. Oh, I know all about you and the Cooper clan. Oh. Scared me.
She's in possession of the eye and uses it to hypnotize all the criminals they arrest to tell her where they stash their treasure. Bentley helps bring Sly free from the prison, and after a few missions together, they're able to free main man Murray. It's in this episode Naylor's position is all but confirmed, where she tries to make off with Clockwork's eye, but after being chased and yet another fight with the Contessa, the gang gets away with the eye, and somehow Naylor stays in the good books of Interpol by arresting our creepy Claw gang member. And Carmelita's still left on the outside. She even had to rely on our resident thief for a getaway. The shipments from Rajan led the gang to the next Claw gang member, Gene Bison, our mad, recently defrosted chap in Canada, home to my favourite area to play. He eventually captures the Cooper gang, taking every clockwork piece they had, selling them to the head of the Claw gang.
Apizio, eternal life, that's what I crave, eternal life.
A flightless bird whose obsession with flying and eternal life took him to clockwork. Everything culminates in one final epic area. But time is of the essence, as they now have all the pieces of clockwork, so now you can track where all the pieces have been assembled, and you get the classic villain, here's my genius master plan and what I intend to do with my victory. But again, our little flightless bird is double-crossed by none other than Naylor, killing him and becoming Clockler. Teaming up with Carmelita, her and Sly take Clockler on with a helicopter, resulting in the destruction of the airship, where you have to jump from piece to piece of the ship itself. And after you board Clockler, knock her out of the sky and you have to destroy the mad chip, which is what's powering all the pieces for all these years. But in doing so, Bentley is crushed and cannot walk, have to be carried away by Murray. Sly gives himself up so that they can get away. Heartbroken, and in Bentley's case, literally. Which added a much more somber and serious note than what we were used to in the series' more jovial nature. The Cooper gang couldn't leave it there though, they always have the last laugh. And after a 2-hour date with Carmelita on helicopter, he gets away, thanks to his friends, and thus concludes the story of Sly 2, Band of Thieves.
Find you, Cooper!
I'll be seeing you soon, Ringtail.
Coming from being a player who first played this series from the third installment, this felt much more at home for me. But it's also important I separate some of the key changes that makes this game so different, yet fundamentally similar, because at its core you can still see and feel the similarities. Sly is still very nimble and athletic. The sound design is still great, and visually the toon cell shading is honestly one of the best examples of cartoon to 3D, especially at the time, alongside Wind Waker of course. The transition to a more open world style also helped make me feel more immersed in the role as a thief, but more importantly, I, the player, had the freedom to choose how I got to places. While some missions obviously were linear, it changed a key part of the game. In the previous, I spent most of the time looking at a window I had to dodge or hit an enemy, but now the focus was purely on movement. How do I scale this building? Or how can I reach this point? Which is the best part of the Sly games. The fluidity of its movements, and it's funny because it's very similar, but it's like they said in the making of. The first game felt like a sneaky Crash Bandicoot with its level design, enemies, and health. Previously, it was one and done unless you had a horseshoe. Now, however, you have a health bar, making it much more of an action game. It changes massively how you engage with the world, because the go-to was to wait for the enemy to finish its animation at the edge of its range, and then go hit it before it starts again. Now you can actively take more risks, and you'll be much more willing to get close and personal, and more importantly, it means you can actually stealth. Some of my gripes with modern stealth games is that all it means is you stealth specifically to kill your way through undetected. But for me, stealth means having the freedom to sneak around, be it as a little murder hobo, or how I prefer, which is being able to sneak past, leaving the guards none the wiser. It would also massively change the theme of Sly if what followed Sly was just a trail of corpses. The way I feel about the episode is almost how I look at games like Super Mario 64. What I remember most is the theme, and at the risk of losing my British card, the French area is my favourite. The design and colour palette is just nice to look at. The game followed a bit of a formula when it came to its chapters, so it definitely became more about what place you want to see while doing it. This is going to sound like an oxymoron, but my biggest criticism is that this game can be a little repetitive, but one of its biggest strengths is how crazy unique some of the areas are. Whether you're Bentley redirecting water flow for a puzzle, you're Sly sneaking around a palace stealing a suit so you can dance in a rhythm like QTE with Inspector Fox, or if you're trying to take on a bison in a log-splitting competition and attempting to rig a rigged game, so you can rightfully, in quotes, earn a piece of clockwork, as you sneak into a cave filled with bears, waiting for them to yawn so you can take a transmitter out of their mouth. Generally speaking, my criticisms line up with the critics. Some things either get a bit too formulaic, and it's a good example of, if this was to stop right here, I would think really well of this one thing, but it goes on just a tiny step too long that makes you ready to move on, which the game generally did. I have mostly just great things to say about this game, but I would have done a disservice to you if I hadn't mentioned that small grievance. That's enough from me though. Let's take a look at the release and see how everyone else felt. Just under 2 years after the release of its predecessor, Sly 2: Band of Thieves made it to store shelves, and it was reviewed extremely well. It's one of the few times that both critics and the audience felt the same. It makes a lot of sense too, because the biggest criticism for Sly 1 was how short it was. It isn't the best gauge of time, as I didn't try to 100% either game, but Sly 1 took me roughly 6 hours, whereas Sly 2 just over 15. Everyone praised similar things, such as the sound design and the graphics. This is to no surprise because it truly does blend the style so well, and looks like a slightly improved Sly 1. As for its critiques, there isn't much to go by, but the most common sentiment is that it can be a little repetitive, and there is some validity there. Previously you could argue there was no fat to its predecessor, but a common critique was it was too short. So it can make the formulaic nature of this game, with each chapter feeling a bit much, whether it's the photo reconnaissance, pickpocketing, or Bentley hacking. This can make the game feel slightly padded out, because these are typically segments that would appear in every chapter. However, there is more than enough of everything else and unique standout moments for you to almost forget about all of it. How did it sell? Even better than the first, sitting at around 1.2 million units compared to the previous 982,000. Coming from a small team by then standards, and the back of Sony as a publisher, they immediately began working on another installment. However, there is some cut content. I alluded to this earlier, but one chapter was cut from Sly 2, and that was the Monaco level. This was meant to be a high-class Riviera with many yachts and a casino which they worked on for approximately 8 months, and was going to be the second chapter for the character Dimitri. This aligns with the fact that Contessa and Rajang both get 2 chapters. Seeing how they work behind the scenes, it seems it was scrapped sometime around giving the map to the artist phase, as the footage we saw shows it's 3D modeled out, but that's it. And all we know about this level is what's in this behind the scenes footage, which has this to say.
But it was sort of the conceptual building block for how we were going to construct Sly 2, which was a big departure from Sly 1. I mean, you can tell like it's all non-linear in how you move through this space. I remember in this level, we were going to have Bentley steal a giant yacht and smash it through all of these docks, and eventually bash it into that large building, which was a casino, so that the Cooper gang could pull off a pretty sweet heist.
What's your role? Sly 3. Rated everyone 10 and older.
I would love to write a massive behind the scenes and see more about their philosophy, guiding principles, hurdles they had to overcome, and more. However, there is shockingly little information about this. In fact, some of the behind the scenes I was able to reference for the first game was thanks to the bonus video with this game. But with how much time there was between the release of the two games, it's almost not surprising. Perhaps it was seen as just a way to delay the members of the team from what was a pretty quick follow-up. In an interview at E3 2005 with GameSpot, we got an early look at what was new, different or the same with the latest iteration of Sly 3. So this behind the scenes section will be covering more of the pre-release press at shows like E3, and thanks to a select few publications, we have some preview information from outlets such as Eurogamer, GameSpot, and IGN. Disguises are here, a new feature in the game. Maybe just because I'm a Star Wars fan, I've always liked the idea of being able to dress up as the enemy to get behind their lines. And it gives you an insight into how they talk to each other. Just look at this one scene from the game.
Ah, am I glad you're here. Mama's making spaghetti tonight and I'm starving. I'm gonna eat like 4 plates of food.
I guess that you really like her cooking.
Mamma mia, I want to be buried in her sauce. It's heaven.
Any problems with that guy?
Said he wanted to be buried in his mom's pasta sauce.
Yeah. That's strange.
They confirmed the return of a couple villains. Mugshot from Sly 1, my favourite, Dimitri from Sly 2. Sly 2 also expanded on the gameplay by making the full cast of the Cooper gang playable, the Brawler and the Hacker. Sly 3 goes a step even further beyond. The cast themselves all get expanded on, but we get many more playable characters. These are usually limited to specific missions, so you won't be free running as your favourite inspector, but you can play as her. In the E3 live demo you can see it via the new split screen mode, but it's actually much more forgiving with the aim, and the best way to describe it is GoldenEye, but you point it roughly in the right direction first. We get a glimpse at the new split screen mode, which is predominantly a local PvP mode, whether you're Sly or Carmelita playing cops and robbers, or dueling in the sky over Holland in a biplane. Guru isn't present in the showcase live on GameSpot, but Eurogamer spoke about playing the newest member of the Cooper gang, a purple Yoda-inspired figure capable of mystical feats, whether it's turning into parts of the environment or clutching onto the back of a minion to charge them headfirst into a generator, which were the, in quotes, more entertaining sections of the demo, alongside the dogfighting, which is a, in quote, difficult thing to get right in a platforming game, as Ratchet & Clank and Jak and Daxter almost proved. As we can now expect, we aren't short on a diverse set of locations. We get a look at Holland, which will have flying at its centerpiece. This is the only location we see on the behind the scenes where Sly is catapulting into the air, so we know there is definitely more to it than just flying. We also get a look at what looks like a crouching tiger hidden dragon area, jumping from bamboo to bamboo in a boss fight, along with a drinking contest in the outback, and underground in Venice. Is anyone here the age where you remember the 3D phase, but the old one where you wore those insane blue and red glasses? I owned this game as a kid, and I do actually remember utilizing this feature, and it wasn't the first time I'd seen it either. Spy Kids 3D was the first, and watching that then going to Pizza Hut was peak 2003 for an 8-year-old. And then Return of the King release, but that isn't 3D, so I won't go off on a tangent about that now. 3D was limited to some very specific scenarios, and the first mission is Into the Depths in Venice. You're prompted as to whether or not you want to bring your goggles. I used to have these, but younger me was told those CD wallets was a better way to store your games. Really do hate 8-year-old me right now. The way it was used though is largely what you expect. Effects coming out of the screen, adding more depth, to dodging lasers and such. It'd be hard to describe this as anything other than a gimmick, but if we look at the intentions of the developers, you can't go much more than that anyway, because if you do, you make it feel required. And then you have to worry about the second-hand market, which was much bigger back then. What if somebody loses or breaks their pair of glasses? So while we could slate them for making it a bit gimmicky, if they had done the reverse and made it required, it would certainly change how I look at it today. Now, replaying the game. But this was received pretty well by Tom Bramwell at Eurogamer, stating, while it makes very little difference to the gameplay, it is genuinely novel and pretty enjoyable. The story of this game starts near the end of the journey, where you're on an island, and as you check in with the crew, a silhouette of everyone minus Bentley confirms they're ready for the heist, and that is for the Cooper Vault. For many years, a Dr. M has been trying to break his way into it to gain the vast wealth of the Cooper family, unsuccessful because he doesn't have the key, which is the signature cane. After making your way through the island and seeing all the ways the villain is definitely the villain, you get to the vault and open it, but it's quickly shot shut and you start to escape the island with the help of Bentley. But right at the end, you're blocked off by Dr. M and his monster, grabbed after a short tussle, and Sly has a flashback, which summarizes the last 2 games. What Dr. M did to the island, and now you're back at the very beginning of this journey, seeing how you got here. Sly learned of the Vault's existence thanks to his father's former colleague, and realizing that Dr. M had effectively turned the island into Fort Knox. He needed to expand the Cooper gang with a wide range of experts to achieve the goal of getting in the Cooper family vault. Their first being their old pal Murray, who was on a spiritual journey thanks to a guru in the outback of Australia. This brought them to Dimitri, who was in a jail cell in Venice. In return for breaking him out, Sly gets much needed information on the location of
Main Man Murray, eh?
It's here where you get a chance at multiple choice dialogue options. There is only one correct answer, and while the rest are wrong, it won't let you fail, merely giving you the illusion of choice, as it's worded more like a negotiation rather than your classic 4-choice dialogue. Murray happened to already be in Venice, sent by his guru to stop the dumping of tar in its waters and make it run clear again. While foiling the plan of Octavio, a mob boss with a deep passion for opera, he makes the mistake of knocking Bentley down, forcing Murray to defend him despite it being against his teachings of no violence. He joins the gang once more, but has to reconcile what he has done with his guru, who was having problems of his own. It turns out he was captured by miners, and they were destroying local aboriginal sites. The guru accidentally awoke the evil mask of Dark Earth, who made all possessed by it bigger and stronger, and of course our resident inspector has followed them, and the mask latches onto her, after a few attempts of demasking some of the locals, whether in a lemonade bar or feeding them to crocodiles. What followed was frankly a bonkers mission. The sleep dart intended to knock her out amplified the mask's effect, making her gigantic, and now you're tasked with launching barrels of explosives, then climbing up Carmelita to hit the mask off. Once successful, the area is saved, the guru joins the Cooper gang, and ultimately Carmelita is back to her normal size. And one of the main reasons for the guru joining the gang was that he was there to make sure that Murray could finish their training, making it the first time that the crew of the Cooper gang has been more than just 3.
He soon came to the conclusion that there was no way inside unless the gang picked up a dedicated RC specialist.
In what looks like an online chat room or dating profile, he gets in touch with a Dutch mouse named Penelope, who will join you if you defeat her boss, the Black Baron, in a flying competition. Despite Sly feeling pretty confident in his piloting skills, he wanted to make sure he had more of a chance out there, and in promising him a favour, Dimitri, who was hired as a colour commentator for the event, agreed to help sabotage the competition. Among them was returning villain Mugshot, and what ensues is you sabotaging the other teams and then leaving really obvious call signs that makes them think someone else did it. Which means when it's time to fly, they will target them, because they think they robbed them. Sly eventually defeats the Baron in a great fight on the wing of a plane, reminding me of that scene in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, except the plane's a lot bigger, and it turns out the Baron was Penelope. She made this costume to get around the age requirement of the competition, leaving the Cooper gang with their next expert. With the gang almost ready to go, just 2 experts remain. Bentley recommends a villain from the first game, a member of the Fiendish Five, the Panda King, who had forsaken his former life and took up meditation. But in this new form, the new local villain, a rooster cleverly named General Tsao, has kidnapped his daughter and wants to marry her, so he agrees if we can rescue her. The plan was a simple one: pose as a wedding planner and get Sly a job as a photographer to get him inside. This plan was spoiled even after all the fantastic photography work I did, so plan B was to say their intentions very loud with Carmelita listening nearby. Not knowing her part in this is by design. So when we eventually take on what Mushu wishes he was, the gang is able to get away, having saved the daughter, and leaving General Tsao with a rather nasty surprise at the wedding altar. And something we didn't cover, and during this whole episode, Murray gets to save his true love, the van.
I will not! I will never leave her behind again! Words do tear at a father's heart. Would that I had such passion when they came from my little Jing King. Fear not, brave hippo. I will destroy the spikes blocking your path.
Do you remember the favor Sly promised? Well, Dimitri is calling it in. It turns out his grandfather was a successful diver in the Caribbean, and his grandson is trying to get back his old gear and the loot he'd gathered over the years. While they did manage to steal the scuba gear, Penelope is captured and put onto Captain Lafouille's ship. Bentley attempts to rescue her, but is injured in the process, leaving Penelope to duel him with a sword.
Nobody touches that turtle but me.
Ultimately winning, and as the gang is escaping, casually, unprompted, Dimitri says he will become their frogman, the last expert they need. And with a new, happy couple. After all that, we're now back at the present day. Sly in the clutches of that giant monster. Sly is saved by Carmelita, who says only she can hurt us, so she'll arrest us both. This has left Sly injured and without his cane after it was flung by the monster. What follows is everyone doing their part. The Guru wielding sharks, Dimitri diving, Panda King and Penelope with the RC car, so we can get both the cane back and Sly in the air to rid the island of the last of its defences. Sly and the original part of the Cooper gang make it to his family vault. They realise after the entrance that this whole place was built for those nimble like Sly. It's a platforming test, while also getting a history lesson on all those who came before him.
This place was started by Slyton Common II. He built his fortune in the employ of the great pharaohs. That must have been around 1300 BC.
And once he's reached the inner sanctum, Dr. M catches up for one last showdown. As usual, Carmelita is not far behind. But she's about to get hit when Sly covers her, getting knocked away in the blast, buying her the time to defeat the Doctor. When she reaches our resident master thief, he has amnesia, to which Carmelita quickly tells him he was her partner Constable Cooper. So they get away together, the gang, not knowing what's happened, eventually go looking for Sly, finding his calling card. Yep, that's right, he's faking amnesia to start over, but he left the ultimate gift, the wealth of the entire Cooper Vault. What happens to the gang is Murray leaves to finish his training and become a professional racer. Meanwhile, Bentley and Penelope start building a time machine to start something new, but as he's holding the Thevius Racoonus, he isn't leaving his profession.
So while this might be the end of our adventures together, it could be the start of something even bigger. Time will tell. Literally. 'Cause I'm building a time machine to find out.
After all that, what did I think of the game? I replayed this to see truly if it measures up to my nostalgia, because that can be pretty powerful. Starting off with Venice, this is one of my favourites. The design, colours of the environment and its missions. This is where it was funny to compare old memories. When I was a kid, I would sit there for minutes on end, combing these paintings for the vault codes, and it turns out it's significantly easier. I was an idiot. Still am. Less of an idiot. I spent more time walking into the buildings than I did searching for the numbers. However, that combined with Sly's shockingly poor Italian accent.
Oh, come on. Everyone's heard of Tony the Killer Bee. You're the terror of every playground from here to Sicily.
It's still a lot of fun, ending with a hilarious opera-themed rhythm battle.
La, la.
This game, much like its predecessors, shines in a lot of ways, one being the movement. They've added wall hooks to expand on the options, but also the overall flow of movement. At any part of the map, there is a way out of a situation. This mainly applies to Sly, but whether it's to hide under something, a jump pad to a roof, being within a couple movements of a rooftop in general, or being able to drop something on the head of a chasing enemy, it's that freedom which makes it feel so good. As you could expect, like the other games, the sound design is still fantastic. So to save you lot hearing me say the same thing again, everything from Sly 2 applies, in terms of its praises. But I do love hearing the subtle variations of the game's theme depending on where you are in the world, or those sneaking steps as you approach an unsuspecting guard, while you prepare to take his favourite pen. When I think about collectathons such as Mario 64, I often think about the variety of themes, which is something Sly 3 holds up to extremely well, even compared to its predecessor. Each area brings new challenges, enemy design, minigames, boss battles, and the key is nothing overstays its welcome. The general repetitive nature of the previous has been toned down. There are a few places I wish lasted longer, but some also shorter. And if anything, it's better to be left wanting more. Something I really appreciate that SuckerPunch do, they're willing to create a new mechanic and only call upon it once. It's a sign of extreme care and hard work on their part. Opera singing, climbing a giant inspector, lemonade drinking contest, flying over the plains of the Netherlands, or attaching yourself to a rocket to attack a dragon. Because you often engage in these mechanics on a limited number of occasions, the lack of depth in these doesn't matter. It serves as something you break away from what you're normally doing. A good example of this is the lockpicking. There are very few cases when you do it, but I enjoy it. You simply rotate the analog stick one direction, wait till you feel a vibration, and go the other way. If it was like Oblivion or Skyrim where I was constantly lockpicking, I might have something different to say about how Sly does it. But because you only do it twice, it doesn't matter. This includes the characters too, whether it's Panda King's auto-targeting fireworks, Penelope's RC car, Carmelita's shooting, and the Guru with his prop hunt or mind control. You get such an extreme variety of gameplay. 3D glasses are one thing I unfortunately cannot confirm how it was. If anyone here is old enough to remember that phase, then I won't have to say anything. But if you're younger and got to play the 3DS, then think of that minus the headaches. Well, for me anyway. I can't pretend this wasn't without its faults. In particular, the grapple cam mechanic for Bentley was rather cumbersome. It might be the only time something similar to a grappling hook annoyed me, whether it was leading a blind Penelope across a scurvy-ridden town, or leading unsuspecting guards onto buttons, or trying to slay enemies pinning down Bentley in the Cooper Vault. What I did like about it though was that it was a paid upgrade that forces the player to engage with the upgrade system, ThiefNet. Another example was the silent takedown for Sly, which is essential when sneaking onto an unsuspecting galleon. In the chapter Dead Man Tells No Tales, you effectively become a pirate with your own ship. Moving around, being able to steer with the triggers, and activate the cannons is very intuitive. And this part is definitely designed for you to make up for the lack of money you might have made on your journey. I made a conscious effort to loot whenever I could, and I was still significantly behind on upgrades. With only a couple being essential, it wasn't the end of the world. But I saw my opportunity. I rose all the way up to first mate on its ranking system, and I thought with nearly 50 ships captured or sunk, how much harder would it be to hit the top? 95? Maybe it's there only for those who really wanted to engage with it. But at that point, I'd already found it highly repetitive, long before I hit 50 ships. So it does make you wonder, why such a high number? And if I could personally, I would have had the members of the gang on the deck with you. Even if it's just visual, it would make a mostly satisfying mechanic feel much more complete and less lonely. The story, while nothing too deep, it's just fun. It really does feel like that classic heist film where you're gathering the world's best to pull off the ultimate job. Maybe someone should make that. And because it's fun, you don't take things too seriously. If the vibe of this game was something gritty with stakes that is do or die, and in some ways for Sly, it is, I would take the ending much worse, but instead you're just there like, oh you. For me, this game holds up to my nostalgia. I like areas like Venice, the Outback, the Netherlands, even more than I remember I liked Dead Man Tells No Tales, for example. Which is surprising, because usually I'll take any excuse to play a pirate, and don't worry Nintendo. Not that kind. While it feels obvious to say nostalgia is powerful, but I've gone back to childhood favourites and realised they weren't good. So I'm very happy to say I do not feel that way about Sly, Honor Among Thieves. But that's enough about how I feel. How did the game perform with critics? And how well did it sell? One year and 2 weeks later, the sequel to the best-selling Sly Cooper released, and it performed worse than all of them, both in reviews and sales, selling around 764,000 units, which puts it 200,000 shy of the first game and 500,000 worse than Sly 2. The exact reasons can be hard to say, but the reviews paint it in a slightly worse light, so maybe it shouldn't be a surprise that it didn't sell as well. The biggest criticism for this game, even by those who reviewed it very highly, is the difficulty. And we can certainly back that up with the combination of having a health bar, plenty of checkpoints, and much like many games, once you learn the pattern, you can go through whatever you're stuck on much more effectively. However, I think it's safe to say if you're picking these games up, it probably isn't for a huge challenge. Naturally, the 3D specs weren't the be-all and end-all, but I think even back then we didn't expect it to make or break the experience. The additions of split screen, while nice, most agreed it wouldn't have been missed if it wasn't there, but they're fun enough in small bites. However, it's hardly a co-op story mode, so nothing long-term if you would like to play with a friend. And much like my own thoughts, which we just covered, others liked how much variety there was in the gameplay whilst remaining true to its core. We could put that to even more context and think about Jak and Daxter series, where Jak 2 and 3 are not massively dissimilar from Ratchet and Clank. Whether you like the direction it went in or not, we cannot deny just how different it was to Precursor Legacy. Despite this being the worst reviewed of the trilogy, it is still sat at a solid 83 on Metacritic, with praises for its world, vibrant colours, great characters, stealth action, and all-round varied gameplay. This game is seen as more of the same, and as Sly 2 was very well received, it could be hard to fault it, especially with such a quick turnaround. In Eurogamer's review, they talk about how, at least in Europe, the lovable Sly Cooper games, despite being amongst the best platformers on the PS2, never sell well, even showing that an alarmingly low-selling Ico outsold Sly 2, a massive 9-1. Any game that manages to deliver gift-wrapped fun the way Sly does has to be worth a look. Just don't ignore it this time, eh? While we should always take the user score with a pinch of salt, the score there is remarkably closer, being just 0.1 behind Sly 2 and 0.4 behind Sly 1. It isn't uncommon for reviewers and players to be differently aligned. Even in Eurogamer's review, it said it is more of the same. But that's not a bad thing because the same is already fun. Whereas those who looked at its predecessors and wanted to know what it could change and adapt would be left disappointed. Fortunately for myself, I'm in the former camp. But I think a part of that comes from the rapid turnaround. If it had been many years, maybe I'd have expected a bit more innovation from SuckerPunch. The closest we have to know how gamers in general feel about the series is the recent re-releases to the PlayStation Classics lineup on the PlayStation Store, which are downloadable ports of the PS2 version. They have scored extremely well by users alike. Sly 1 is at 4.91 out of 5 with 16,000 ratings. Sly 2 and 3 both at 4.93 with 8.8 thousand and 6.6 thousand ratings respectively. Nostalgia is a factor, but it doesn't change that these games are genuinely fantastic. This would be the last Sly game we would see for quite a few years. We received 3 games in almost 3 years, but SuckerPunch wanted to change directions, and in a look back with Nate Fox interview on PlayStation's YouTube channel, we have this.
I remember there was a focus test where the person who was running the test asked one of the kids, a 7-year-old kid, said, "Hey, what do you think about this game?" The kid said, "Oh, I like it a lot. I like it a lot. It'd be perfect for my little brother." 7-year-old kid. And so when we got done with Slide 3, we said, hey, we need to make a game that speaks to the fantasy that is a little bit broader, right? Something that adults and kids will both be interested in.
So thank you to the edgy 7-year-old who started their phase, not a phase, a little too early. No judgment from me either, because I used to straighten my hair, which seems to be the quintessential experience for someone who was born in the late 90s. This was the last Sly Cooper game that SuckerPunch made, moving over to their new franchise, Infamous. We also have a little more behind the scenes from the Sly voice actor who described the end of their tenure at SuckerPunch.
Honored to work with both teams. You know, when we finished the third Sly game, I remember Nate Fox being pretty clear of like, we're done. I think he even told us this in the recording, like, this is the last game we're making, but we really hope that the game continues on, that a new studio picks it up, and the franchise just lives on forever, and that people make the games again and again and again.
Not a lot can be said about Sly Cooper, Shadows in Time, but Vigil Games, the team that will eventually bring us Darksiders, had been at E3 with a working prototype of their own game and showed it to Sony, who said the following in an interview with MinMax.
We started Vigil, then we worked on the prototype that we took to E3.
And I remember at that E3 we had a great meeting with Sony, and they were like, this prototype's really fun, because we had this working prototype on this broken ass monitor that we were carting around, and they were like, it just feels so good, but your team is so small, you will never ever make a next gen game. Please stop. What about PSP? We have this thing. Hey, there we go.
Do something for us. And we were legit excited about that. We're like, okay. I remember I was doing like a gray box for a Sly Cooper on PSP because we were talking to Sony. They had thrown out the idea of what about a Ratchet and Clank game on PSP. I'm a huge Ratchet fanboy.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, please that. And then it turned into Sly Cooper.
It seems the plot of the game was very similar to what we actually ended up getting from someone else, which was to visit the past and see previous members of the Cooper gang, which was a natural evolution considering the third game, Honor Among Thieves, ended with Sly retiring and Bentley building a time machine. All we have left of this project is concept art, but that's because this didn't get very far when Visual Games was made an offer they couldn't refuse, which was to make Darksiders, but have their studio become a part of THQ. And those games are great, so we can't begrudge them for that. It is cool to think though, what if that same team made a Sly or Ratchet & Clank game for the PSP? Or even the mainline console? Sly Cooper Network of Thieves is another cancelled title that was in development with Sanzaru Games, which was aimed at the PlayStation Vita. What makes this more relevant is that this developer will make the next 2 released Sly Cooper games. This game never reached full production, and its existence today is only known because Matt Kramer, someone who was working on the project, posted on his private Facebook, which then got shared online. It wasn't specified if this game was ever pitched to Sony, but we know it was going to have a level featuring Transylvania, bottles were going to return, and from the limited pieces we have, something that resembled closer to the first game. Starting out more linear, then opening up. But as you can see from the images on the screen, we don't have a lot to go by. Now it's time for something we know wasn't cancelled, and made by the same developers. Sanzaru Games were practically a new studio when they started working with Sony. As quite a few stories I've heard when it comes to the founding of new studios, they were formed from another one. In this case, Activision, along with some employees from Z-Axis, or Z-Axis Games, who were acquired by Activision a couple years prior. They developed a series of sports games with the odd exception. I was surprised to see one of the games I owned as a child, which was Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX. They released a game called Ninja Reflexes for the Wii in partnership with Nunchuck Games and EA. Their next title was for Sony, and it was to make a PS2 port of a PSP game called Secret Agent Clank. Yes, that Clank. As they were only responsible for the port itself, there aren't masses to say about the game, because problems people had with the original weren't going to massively change for the port. It was praised for its enhanced controls, such as having the ability to control the camera, something we experienced when playing the various different versions of Battlefront in my last complicated history. However, the game didn't have the bells and polish they would expect from porting it to a more powerful console. They worked on one more game with another developer, a Wii game titled Mystery Case Files: The Malgrave Incident. I think this was in a more supporting role because the same year the Sly Cooper collection released, a HD re-release of, to me, a beloved classic. This was also a series known as Classic HD, where Sony worked with numerous developers to bring some classics from the PS2 to the PS3, bearing in mind that only the original 60GB version of the console was backwards compatible. Other series such as Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank, God of War, Tomb Raider, Prince of Persia, Metal Gear Solid, and even more were re-released to the PS3. In this case, Sanzaru Games we know like the series, as they were working on the beginnings of their own Sly game, which we just covered. Sanzaru approached Sony with a self-funded prototype, which impressed them because the original game's toon-shaded style transitioned well to HD. Sony opted to greenlight the project to gauge interest in the franchise, whilst also upraising 16:9 widescreen support, 60 FPS, and obviously 3D. Because those TVs were all the rage then. And if you're silly and love your digital rewards like I do, they added trophy support to all the games in the collection. Along with these mainline changes, there were tons of little fixes and adjustments. After all, you can't just patch a PS2 game. If you would like to see all of those, go to the Sly fandom wiki for the Cooper collection. Much better I direct you there than effectively list a series of patch notes. This was made in partnership with SuckerPunch, but as we've covered, being a smaller team, they are a one game at a time studio, and they were still focusing on the infamous series. People often wonder why SuckerPunch didn't make this collection, but it's often industry standard to bring in other companies, whether it's porting to another system or making remasters with slight tweaks. Generally speaking, you won't need the original devs doing the groundwork, instead more supervisory. The Sly Cooper collection released physically in November 2010, then digitally in May 2011. Critically, it was received as well as it always has been. While the port had some issues, overall it was functional, and a good way to play the game at HD and 60 frames per second, which lends itself very well to this kind of gameplay. Everything just feels smoother and more responsive. As a result, the issues don't really detract from the experience. One that I had, which is an issue specifically with the physical edition of the collection, was the HUD not filling the screen, which was noticeable during cutscenes, and whenever you used the tech binoculars, the Binocucom. I personally had a few crashes, but I haven't seen many complain about this, so that could be isolated to more of a me problem. Sales-wise, according to VG charts, it sold approximately 700,000 units, the vast majority of which were in the US. This lines up with how the other games performed, if not slightly better if you take in consideration that the install base is small on the PS3, compared to one of the best-selling consoles of all time. It's worth noting, however, there has not been any official sales numbers from Sony, so please take these with a pinch of salt. While this series is in chronological order, we will temporarily jump ahead to 2014, when this game got ported to the PS Vita, which, much like the downloadable version on the PS3, had all the numerous fixes, but had one problem for game preservation. Due to memory limits, it could only include the first 2 games on the disc, and the third was a download code on the box, which is another reason why I support stop killing games. But the games have been preserved at least in its more original state with the PS4 re-releases of the PS2 games. The PS3 was not the easiest to code for, which is why in general we see less ports of those games to the PS4, and most of them are on the streaming service instead. But I digress. The purpose of this game was to gauge fan interest and see if it was worth making a sequel. Sony must have been happy, but it does seem that Sanzaru Games had a vague hope to begin with, because the Sly collection contains a teaser for what will be the first episode of Sly 4. No working title, but a little nod to the player for beating all 3 games. Or it was to get fans to put some pressure on Sony for that sequel. On the 2nd of August 2011, Sony acquired SuckerPunch, and they had the following to say. SuckerPunch Productions is one of the most highly acclaimed development studios in the industry. We have enjoyed a wonderful relationship with the company for over 12 years. We are delighted to officially welcome them to the SCE family, said Shuhei Yoshida, President, Sony Computer Entertainment Worldwide Studios. The financial arrangement for this deal was not disclosed, but it isn't surprising this happened. Acquisitions were happening more and more frequently, and SuckerPunch, minus its first game, had been working exclusively with Sony for over a decade. And with the founders' ideology of not having to worry about publishing their own titles, why not make their arrangement even more official? After all, they'd already allowed another developer to work on Sly Cooper for Sony, and co-founder Brian Fleming left this statement in the press release. We've enjoyed an incredible relationship with Sony that has allowed us to combine our creative, design capabilities with their guidance to make some of the best franchises to hit the PlayStation platforms. Equally important, the relationship with SCE has provided us with the flexibility and trust to take creative risks and invent new properties, said Brian Fleming, managing partner, SuckerPunch Productions. As a part of the Sony Computer Entertainment Group, we look forward to introducing more innovative content and providing consumers with exciting, new, interactive experiences. While covering the series in release order, I'm a bit of a conundrum, because Sanzaru Games released 2 games at the same time, which is the last games to be released in the series. But doing some digging, this game was made after Sly 4, but due to a delay on Sony's end for spacing out titles released on the platform, Sanzaru had some time between their game going gold, so in secret they started expanding on their minigames and packaged them all in a little title called Bentleys Hackpack. One thing you, the player, would have been used to seeing throughout the series is Bentleys hacking gameplay, and that is the theme of this game entirely. This game is a collection of his hacking antics in arcade form. There are 3 games: the classic twin-stick shooter the series has always had named System Cracker, a side-on bullet hell shoot-em-up called Alter Ego, and the obligatory motion-controlled game called Spark Runner. Now, it's pretty obvious to say if you enjoyed these minigames before, you will like this game. It's just more of that. I personally enjoyed the variety of Bentleys missions brought throughout the series simply because it broke up the gameplay, adding that small amount of variety needed to refresh the experience. However, that doesn't translate as well for me when it comes to being a standalone title. These are typically the kind of games I would opt to never play. It would feel wrong to complain about this too much though, because this game was available at an insanely extortionate price of $2.99. And this was a part of Sony's push for the cross-buy feature, meaning a purchase for the PS3 was also a purchase for the PlayStation Vita, and vice versa. There are very few reviews of this game on Metacritic. There is just one for the Vita and one for the PS3, being Destructoid and PlayStation Magazine respectively, both saying it's a good enough game for the cost that it is. Worth taking the plunge, which I get because if I had a Vita and needed to kill some time, I'd grab it as well. A little travel game on the way to work? Perfect. As usual with the series, there are no sales numbers. But with how starved we are for reviews, it seems many either didn't know or weren't bothered about covering this game. It released on the PS3, Vita, Android and Apple, but we have nothing to indicate about the sales apart from the fact we didn't get a sequel. If it wasn't for the Sly Cooper collection, this series was starting to feel forgotten by Sony, with fans constantly wondering if they'll get another game in the franchise. Those hopes were teased because the reward for finishing all 3 games of the Sly Cooper collection is a teaser for what we now know as the episode based in Japan. Sly is a silhouette, which is a nice nod to the previous game intros, but obviously our favourite thief is very recognisable, especially with his signature cane. All we can know about the game from this is that it's so early that it's a working title, simply shown as Sly 4 with a question mark, and that collectible bottles are back, which was a feature in the first 2 Sly games. Development of this game is hard to find, and despite them talking about making a dev diary on Sly 4, it was never made public if it was made. So instead, all we have is 2 E3 showcases and some blog posts from the co-founder, Glenn Egan, who also worked as the executive producer. In June 2011, fans got the first showcase of gameplay in the upcoming game. What we see is the boss battle that concludes the first episode, and this is very much in its working form, as we can see the character model gets even more detail later on. And this wouldn't be the first time. Sanzaru shared gameplay of the Cooper collection which didn't have a stable frame rate, stating it would be good by the time it released. Which was correct. We're also going to look at the new costume feature, expanding what the series had done previously, which was just a disguise. Now it's confirmed that each area will have its own costume, which can serve as a disguise in some cases, but also an ability. Here we get to see the samurai, which is immune to fire and can reflect fireballs back to its target. We can see some differences with this version compared to the one that came out. The colours are more saturated and the details less defined on Sly's face. It raised a few, not many comments in the PlayStation blog, saying they hope to see the improvement because it looks like a PS2 game. And while that was clearly someone exaggerating, this was back when console generations saw massive uplifts, and less of the diminishing returns we're used to at the moment. At the following E3 2012, we got a much greater look at our returning thief, and the first thing they covered was the cloud saving, allowing you to cross-progress your game on the PS3 and the Vita. The episode they showed off was Medieval England with Sir Gareth, and they talked about the process of making a Sly game in an interview with GameSpot.
To persuade Sony that it would be a great idea for our studio to work on the project. Yeah. Something that we looked at was on Sly 2 and 3, just the volume of variety of gameplay, and it was almost a daunting task. Where
you look at the old games, you know, as a game developer, and it's, you know, like Glenn said, it's a daunting task because you have all these different playable characters, you have all these different modes of play. You know, you're driving, you're doing these epic boss battles, you're doing these hacking games. You know, it's not just a rinse and repeat first-person shooter. Yeah. You know, walk into a space, kill a bunch of guys, watch a cinematic, and move forward.
When you're hanging a game on maybe a single mechanic, it's easy just to pepper dash in levels and whatnot. But with something like this, the entire pacing and feel of it is so important. So
we have this huge Excel sheet from the beginning to the end of the game, and we basically break down all the percentages of like who you're playing as and what mechanics you're playing as when, and we just try to even it out as best as possible.
They're absolutely right. That is something in this video I've already spoken about. Something that set the Sly series apart was the fact that SuckerPunch was willing to simply create a mechanic and only call on it twice, just for the sake of variety. But naturally, it's a lot of dev work compared to the conventional approach, which is keep everything within the core gameplay you created. One thing that was left as unknown was whether or not you would need to buy a copy for the game on both the PS3 and the Vita to utilize the cross-save feature. While it wasn't revealed at that E3 or the later Gamescom event, we do know they opted for a cross-save, trophy, and cross-buy. This could be due to the poor sales of the handheld, and it was an attempt to increase the hardware sales with other titles such as Little Big Planet 2, Ratchet & Clank Q-Force, Wipeout Fusion, and more did something very similar. Not every title did cross-progression and cross-trophies, but if you were someone who was fully embedded in the ecosystem, this was a pretty huge win for you. It was at Gamescom, just a few months after E3, that this game's release date was pushed back to early 2013. The reason was simply that it was a very busy release window, so they wanted to give it a better chance out of the gate. A blog post in November showing Master Ryoichi Cooper, along with what we know about the development of Bentleys Hackpack, supports the fact that the game was ready to release in November. It is confirmed in the comments of that blog post that each episode will follow another member of the Cooper clan. Hopes for the franchise were high, with Glenn, the co-founder and executive producer, stating that they wouldn't be developing Sly without SuckerPunch on board, and they themselves confirmed they received a copy of the game early. On their pitch presentation, they deemed what would be critical success factors. This game had to be seen as a reinvention of the franchise, keep the same aesthetic while bringing in new social features, and it needs to appeal to a broad audience, rather than the younger demographic that the focus test previously outlined for older Sly games, and that edgy 7-year-old. Before we cover how this game performed, what was the story? In some ways, Sly 3 closed it off, but it did leave an angle open for a sequel should they ever fancy it. Sly faked amnesia and was living a happy life with Carmelita in Paris. Murray is still racing in his favourite van, and Bentley with Penelope is making a time machine. During this, he's been examining the Thievius Racoonus, the Cooper clan's family book. I noticed the very pages in front of him are disappearing before his eyes. Bentley reforms the gang, but for the time machine to work, you need an item from the era you intend to travel to, making the plan for Sly to go to the local museum and steal a dagger from feudal Japan. Carmelita catches him during the heist, having never fully believed Sly's amnesia gambit, and you can see she is rightfully mad. After all, it isn't a Sly journey without our inspector chasing us. The reason for going to feudal Japan is to check on the ancestor Ryuichi, who is not only a master thief responsible for the ninja spy jump, but also the inventor of sushi, obviously. Here, a modern-day criminal named El Jefe was in control of the area, which is another sign why something is up with the past. Ryuichi is imprisoned and the cane stolen. That'll be a theme throughout every episode, but for now, the question of how these modern-day villains were getting here was unknown. So after a series of missions that had you rescuing Ryuichi, reclaiming his sushi house, and Murray distracting guards while dressed as a geisha, it ends with you taking down El Jefe. But your victory is short-lived because a bunch of goons in gas masks come down and grab the cane before disappearing. One of them, however, dropped a sheriff's badge. And it was there that our main man Dimitri, who had the book, confirmed Tennessee Kid Cooper. This gives Bentley the dates he needs, along with the badge to travel forward to the Wild West. In the Wild West, it's a similar story, where the member of the Cooper clan has been captured. In this case, it was the local sheriff named Toothpick who framed him for a bank heist he never did. Because of course, being a member of law enforcement is just a cover-up. And yet another modern-day gangster is in the past. Sly rescues Tennessee by getting arrested himself and breaking them both out from the inside. It turns out that our favourite inspector was also here and captured as well, so Tennessee rescues her. And frankly, the petty energy to be impressed and flirt with Sly's ancestors because of what he pulled is an energy I respect. After a few more incursions, Carmelita goes to the gang at the hideout and updates them on the situation. In the present day, a criminal known as Cyril Le Paradox, a billionaire art collector who sent Carmelita to where they are now. The episodes end, as they always do, the bad guy defeated, and their ancestor's cane just out of their grasp. It's a dramatic one, with it being a classic Western train heist that leaves the gang not enough time to stop the van with no idea where to go. They grab Murray's necklace, which takes the gang to prehistoric Ice Age Australia, one of the few throwbacks to Murray's guru adventures from Sly 3. Despite throwing themselves at random to Ice Age Australia, Sly has an ancestor there too, nicknamed Bob. There is one of the criminals that Le Paradox has been organising called the Grizz, who is an art thief, but in this case he makes paintings, buries them, and then discovers it in the modern day to make a fortune. Much like our Dimitri, this dude is inspired by hip-hop. Carmelita, who was still mad at Sly, eventually comes round to the gang and decides to help out. After all, Paradox was the bigger skunk to fry. So, after the usual missions and an ice skating themed boss battle, Dimitri points the crew to the next location, medieval England. And the Grizz just happened to have the perfect item to get there. Ah, medieval England, a land plagued with robots, and the Black Knight certainly nothing like the Black Baron. The ancestor here is Sir Galith of the Knights of the Cooper Order, voiced by the fantastic Yuri Lowenthal, who was captured trying to fight the Black Knight and turned into a jester performing at a carnival. During all this, the question has been, what happened to Penelope? While out on a mission as Bentley, it is confirmed that she is the Black Knight. It turns out she sold the plan for the time machine to Le Paradox, because Bentley wasted his potential by not using the time machine to make themselves the richest criminals on the planet. Sly is holding him back, Penelope says, with the whole good guy only steals from other criminals mentality. This will naturally break Bentley, sending him into a deep depression, leaving the gang to conduct the missions without the brains of the business. And this includes taking Penelope down. Everyone comes together nicely, but as the giant robot falls, it pins Sly into place, leaving him vulnerable. Then, at the right moment, Bentley is back to save the day. And the fight felt like a 3D Rock'em and Sock'em robot kind of deal. With Penelope's robot eventually beaten, Dimitri points them to their next location, ancient Arabia. And whilst Carmelita was captured, she pocketed a coin for evidence which just so happened to be from that exact place. So the time machine was now set. The 40 Thieves was a notorious gang that Sly's ancestor, Salim al-Cooper, was a part of, but their numbers dwindled over time, and even our dear Cooper is hoping to retire, and as a result, rescuing him feels different. It's that classic last job before I retire vibe. So you're hoping he actually does get to hang his cane up for good. They're tasked with taking down failed musician Miss Decibel. Her power though is thanks to a trumpet that got stuck in her trunk. She's able to harness it for a power in hypnosis, and her job for the Paradox, besides the usual stealing the cane, is forging documents that prove the Paradox's royal lineage. The finale of this area is kinda nuts. Never in my life did I think I would utilize motion controls to shake Carmelita's ass in order to distract guards from the heist. Once Sly faces down Miss Decibel, the Paradox is still able to get away with the cane, but also Carmelita. The gang felt defeated. Despite the gameplay of winning all your boss battles, Paradox had no care for those who worked for him, and left them behind with exactly what he wanted, the Cooper canes. Dimitri called the gang, complaining he had to boogie down in Skunk Town, showing the gang where they had to go next. Present day Paris, where it all began. Coming back to Paris, they could see the results of all the previous missions, the city now covered in paradoxes. This did allow the gang to do some digging into their past, and it turns out he was also from a family of thieves. But he just so happened to be worse than Sly's dad, and when going for the same diamond, he was too slow, getting arrested in the process, leaving Paradox to learn none of the family's thieving skills, getting imprisoned himself later on. It turns out that being in prison helped him, because this is where he made all the connections and skills he needed to form his own gang. The game ends on one final confrontation, on Paradox's blimp, where the ancestors all come together and retrieve their canes before being returned to their own time. This is where the big bad does one more thing to get rid of the Coopers for good, and that's rig his time machine inadvertently ripping a hole in the space-time continuum. Getting the gang out of there is a nice farewell. With Carmelita, he vows to finish this once and for all. Sly has Paradox defeated, but he is a good guy, so when Paradox asks for a hand, he grants it, having his paraglider stolen, which quickly goes wrong for him as he's hit by a plane on the way down, leaving Sly on his own to be pulled into the rip, making it impossible for the gang to find him. Paradox somehow survives the ordeal and gets arrested, but as for Sly's location, it's unknown. They need to know where he is in order to get the right item to travel to him. Carmelita is heartbroken, but the gang vows to find him no matter what. That's where the story ends, unless you've collected all the trophies, giving you a post-credit scene, where you get to see Sly wake up in ancient Egypt. 8 years it had been since the release of a new Sly game, Honor Among Thieves. How did everyone feel about it, and how did it perform? On Metacritic, the score is 75, with the user score being generally a little higher, which is usually the trend we see, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt, as those still receive scores long after its release, and gamers tend to be passionate, whether it's for or against something. Depending who you were, this was listed as a positive or negative. This game was seen as more of the same, but a recurring theme, whether it's reviewers or gamers alike, is that we expect some kind of advancement. Not necessarily a big change, but enough to prove the series can progress. After all, franchises like Mario could still find a way to innovate on its 2D variant to this day. Mario Wonders is proof enough. 38 years later, still releasing games that are able to catch the essence of what makes Mario, Mario. The problem for some, even when Sly was originally coming out for the PS2, is that from 2 to 3, not enough change to convince those who hadn't given it a go to give it a go. It was more of the same, but with the rapid release between the two, it's no wonder. However, it's been 8 years, and the minor adjustments to the formula isn't enough for some, with Eurogamer's Tom Bramwell commenting on one of the new costume abilities saying, Sly picks up new ability while time traveling, for example, by collecting special suits, but each is a letdown, conferring obvious and functional skills like a long-range pouncing move or the ability to break down heavy walls, none of them offers the same tactile pleasure as a simple act of Sly mounting a wall, and they can be fiddly to switch between as well. It's worth noting that Tom Bramwell was the person I quoted for the Sly 3 review 8 years before this one. Other criticisms from multiple outlets say largely the same thing. The game is too childish. I think this kind of criticism doesn't really hold as much weight because that tells me they're not the target audience. I do firmly believe, however, if something is well made, regardless of the target audience, people of all ages can enjoy the same thing. The combat does get a mention, with it often feeling flat until the boss fights come in, but it gets less of a mention because the platforming correctly gets more attention. While more of the same criticism that has plagued the series is how easy the game is. Loading times were also a problem for almost everyone, whether it was loading into a mission, out of one, or leaving the safe house. It was surprising how often you would be waiting to load in. It isn't all bad news though, with praises for its diverse levels, tons of collectibles, diverse characters, and its revival of the classic cel-shaded graphics that made Sly so popular to begin with. Overall, most outlets saw it as a fine addition to the franchise, with reviews as high as 9 out of 10 by Game Informer and Games Radar. Players enjoyed it even more so with the sales. If you combine it with the PS3 and the Vita, it totals around 850,000 units sold, which puts it on par with the other Sly games. It suffered from the usual of doing well in America, but struggled to break into the European and Japanese markets. All this brings me back to the presentation, when outlining what this game needed. It had to be seen as a reinvention, it had to be seen appealing to a broader audience. But with the beauty of hindsight, this game ultimately came off as very similar to the original games. Rather than a reinvention, it was more of a next-gen looking Sly Cooper. The project scope section of their presentation gives an idea as to the numbers they'd need to break even. 413,000 units for a return of investment, 475,000 units for a return on sales, 726,000 units, this is assuming that it was on budget. The presentation states that lessons learned from prototyping give a rough estimate of 60 people for 3 years and a budget of $20 million, which, if you do the sums, makes a break-even point at $40, 500,000 units sold. So who knows the state the game was actually in after release. Sly Cooper 4 Time Bandits was going to be the name of the original title and was intended to be a launch title for the PS Vita, thanks to a leaked presentation and a series of unlisted videos by a YouTuber named Tabriz. We have a good idea of the kind of features we could have seen in Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. While what we got was a very conventional Sly game, the reality is if we got 100% of what was pitched to Sony all the way back in what was most likely October 2009, it could have been vastly different. In this presentation, it broke down the gameplay via the following. 50% traditional Sly. This would be a single player story that we all know and love. 30% of the game would be social, adding friends, collecting, trading, and getting items. 20% would be hideout gameplay. This would have you decorating, customizing, and protecting your hideout alongside ThiefNet. You would get items through single player, sent from friends, collected via QR codes with the built-in cameras in the Vita. Items could be left in your hideout for people to visit and collect. You could sell or trade items through the ThiefNet, trading boards, or steal them from secured areas which is guarded by the player-created hazard rooms, which would have the player placing a series of blocks with different traps and traversal to get to your precious treasure. And if you failed, the player would receive a notification for it. When Sly 3 ended, Murray did two things. 1, finish his training with his guru, and 2, try and become a professional rally driver. And that was something Sanzaru Games was working on. This utilised the unique control scheme of the Vita with motion steering and using the back touchpad to accelerate and brake. I would have hoped Murray would be in the van he is so in love with, but maybe this was purely a working concept. A key focus of this pitch is the use of the NGP, which I can only assume means next generation product. In this case, it means using a lot of unique control schemes or features it has. To put this into more modern perspective, it's like making sure you used adaptive triggers on the controller and the fast loading times of the PS5. However, this feature never made it to the full game, most likely due to the fact it wasn't a Vita exclusive. Now this is something I'm mad about. Co-op Sly Cooper. This is separate to the whole ThiefNet thing that we talked about earlier. Not a part of the base game, but instead there was going to be a framework to add co-op themed DLC episodes to the game. In the footage, they're both Sly, so we can assume it would be as Sly and maybe the other as the ancestor, which would be the most fun option. When it comes to the co-op content, it's the cutscene you get for getting every trophy in the game, and that is Sly stranded in ancient Egypt. Many think this was alluding to a sequel, but thanks to an interview on Kinda Funny Games Daily with Greg Miller, we have a little more information, and that was that Egypt was originally meant to be episode 1 of the game, and then it was shifted to be a DLC. They loved working on Sly, but simply said, if you want more Sly, let Sony know.
We love Sly. You know, I'll tell you a tidbit of information. So the original first episode of Sly Cooper Thieves in Time was supposed to be Egypt.
Okay.
With Sly Tutankhamun.
Yeah.
And then Egypt was going to be a DLC episode.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was always the intention, and then you know, we never got to finish that out.
Sure.
I do have the you know, in the team at Sanzaru, like, we have the story, we have the whole episode done, you know, on paper form.
Of course.
But we would love to come back to that world. I hate leaving them there. It's the question we get the most.
Sure.
So all I can say is, you know, if you guys want more Sly Cooper, let Sony know.
Herman Hulse, hit him up.
Yeah, but we're ready. We're always ready to dig into that.
Awesome.
And it was a great franchise to work on, and we really miss it.
I hope you get back to it one day. I liked what you guys did a lot with it.
Cool, thank you.
No
yeah,
problem.
It was a great project.
It's unknown the exact reason why it was cut. One of the rumors, according to the Sly Cooper fandom wiki, is due to file size for the PS Vita disc, opting to push it to DLC. Now that we know how Sly performed, it wouldn't surprise me if Sony later cancelled the DLC, leaving the secret ending to be a little nod to those who went the extra mile, and keeping the way open for a Sly 5, should that ever happen. Now, what are my thoughts on it? Sly Cooper is an interesting franchise to me. In fact, a part of this journey of learning how the devs made the game, replaying through the whole series, and discussing with friends, both of whom I got to play the game for the first time and returning fans, was because I wanted to see if this series held up to my nostalgic memory. The ultimate question being, are these games good? And even then, all my fond memories were of the third game, Honor Among Thieves. So playing through 1 and 2 was a pleasant surprise. Sly 4 is a little different. Partly because it's made by a different developer, and partly because it was made for the next generation of consoles. Because I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nostalgic for the PS2 or GameCube era. The quickest way I could describe this in a way that's most understandable is this game is like when your favourite cartoon series undergoes an artistic change. The cast is there, but the show feels slightly different, which depending on the side you're on is good or bad. Out of the gate, I was much less of a fan of the gameplay of this. Everything just felt slightly off, whether it's the parkour, pickpocketing, or how the visual effects come off when you do something. That classic comic onomatopoeia, pow, boom, bam! The weight is missing. And to be less vague, the sound effects are a part of it.
Excellent hit, Murray!
It does all those things, but the weight and fluidity of these are gone. Those big comic effects have a little pop-up, but without the sound to back it up, it ultimately falls flat. There are some improvements. Having the active compass pointing where you need to go, it's nearly impossible to get lost. I can't help but feel that's a problem of their own making. Some of these areas are a little too cluttered, but you also spend a lot less time as Sly compared to the previous games in the series, which means looking for a way to a high point so you can check for the waypoint on the map is much less viable. It's like the whole idea of making you synchronize your map from a tower in Assassin's Creed. Use the height to learn the lay of the land. Which brings me to one of my main gripes with this game. You don't get to play as Sly enough. While I praised the previous games for breaking up the Sly gameplay, and what felt like a bit of variety in the previous games begins to feel like not enough in this one. It's like the ratio of Sly to the gang missions are out of balance. After all, Sly has all the fun parkour, stealth, and can interact with pretty much everything on the map, whereas Bentley, Murray, and eventually Carmelita, you are forced to ignore most of the map and run on the ground, which makes you spot another big gripe for me, the stealth. Being sneaky is my favourite part of this franchise. It's a game that doesn't want you to fight, but seek an alternative path. And this game still does that, especially with how lackluster some of the effects can be, thinking of the silent obliteration, which with the input lag you just have to do the combo and trust it'll come off, compared to the cleaner version in Sly 3. I'm not saying that previous Sly games were Mission Impossible levels of difficulty when it comes to being sneaky, but the way you can skirt around the line of sight of guards in this game are next levels insane. It ended up making me play in a way that was to push the boundary as much as possible. How close can I get? How loud can I run? And even if you do get caught, guards can't really chase you. Just jump up somewhere and they'll give up the search. So as someone who wants stakes and more difficulty to the stealth, I was left wanting. I do understand that I may be in the minority there though. Treasures are back. These were a feature only in Sly 2. But these work out to be time trials with money and a collectible reward at the end, making purchases at the Thieves Net even easier. Collecting all treasures in an area also unlocks an arcade machine. These are games you've played before, as it's a leaderboard version of the Bentley hacking games. These serve as a reason for you to explore each episode fully, but you'll be locked out of some until you have every costume. So it might not be possible till you've been to every episode. And to make sure not everything I say about this game is negative, I do enjoy the idea of the almost Metroidvania-like structure of future rewards allowing me to revisit an area. But now you have the necessary ability, whether it's shooting an arrow with a rope or diving with a saber tooth on your back. Although I do think the costumes could be a little less clunky to switch between. How are the ancestors though? How much you like them will depend on the mechanics they introduce. The first, Ryochi, is very similar to Sly, so even when you do use his special ability, because each Cooper has one, you're put into scenarios that are very reminiscent of previous games. So what's not to love? In Ryochi's case, his ability allowed you to dash far from point to point, making you feel like a kung fu action star. And the general gist from me is, if it allows me to have more fun movement options, I probably liked what the ancestor did. The two I didn't like were Tennessee Kid Cooper, partly because it turned the game into a slightly worse Ratchet & Clank, with its very similar rail mechanics and shooting heavy gameplay. The most efficient way to play him was to simply wait for your crack shot to recharge, and like before, I typically welcomed the break in the formula, but instead I found myself wanting to go back, or at least rush through so I could pray for a better episode. I was not answered in my hopes and dreams for a better episode when the next was the prehistoric Cooper, Bob. He isn't stealthy in any way. His core ability is to be able to climb solid ice, being in the Ice Age. It makes sense, but at least we do get a Rocky training montage spoof. And right as I was done, ready to put the controller down, my prayers were answered as the next episode was themed around medieval England. I would like to clarify that I'm not being biased because it's my own country. Usually for me it's actually a downside. Having been overdosed in my learning about the Tudors and Shakespeare in school, I was, however, pleasantly surprised. It was fun to explore the crazy robot versions of the goons, and the costume for the area being shooting arrow ropes. It leads to some fun traversal. Sir Galeth of the Cooper Knights, and I must admit, I enjoyed partly because I do like Yuri Lowenthal's voice. Was it very English? No, but it also wasn't overly American. The only weird thing with Sir Galeth though, was that they downgraded Sly for one ability just for this episode for him to be more viable. Wall hooks. Sly traditionally is able to fling himself rather high, but in just this episode, barely anything at all. This is because Sir Galeth's main ability is a charged wall hook, allowing for greater heights and being able to hit through obstacles. Despite that, I still enjoyed this ancestor. And last up was Salim. His ability to climb extremely quickly vertically was very cool. Overall, there was more good than bad on that front. It does make me wonder why these awesome abilities weren't in the Thevius Racoonus. Maybe these abilities are otherworldly, but it would have been cool to see Sly's repertoire expanded on. Overall, my thoughts on the Ancestors' abilities were, if it gave me the opportunity for more fun, thief traversal, it was a good thing. And the only ones that were more of a letdown to me were Kid and Bob. I don't want to nitpick the game too much, so I'll try and go over these next details a little quicker. This game has an over-reliance on rhythm mechanics. While previously you may see it once or twice a game, now it comes back far too often. And this is coming from someone whose opera battle in Sly 3 is among my favourite in the entire series. But whether it's dancing as a geisha Murray, ice skating, or literally shaking tail as Carmelita, and that's not every case of it, The other is the fact in boss battles, once you dodge everything, you need to get your classic few hits as opposed to just finding your own window and slowly whittle them down. It just felt like the game would allow me to hit them, in a way. For the bosses in general, it almost felt like once I'd done what they asked me to do, it would just allow me a safe window to get a few hits, where they just sat there and took it for a minute. Other than that, I did get the loading issues mentioned by gamers and critics alike. Frame rate overall struggled in a lot of places. I did compare it to other PS3 games. I was wondering if this was the norm and this game wasn't alone, but you could say Heavenly Sword was more ambitious than this, and Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction ran buttery smooth, just as an example. It goes to no shock that the Bentley minigames still don't do it for me. The Binocucom now moves like an in-game camera, free of the person. That was very pedantic, okay, but you know, before I felt like I was someone scoping out a target, now it just kind of flies off and gives me a tour of the place. But yes, very pedantic. Okay, one last thing. What the hell does this device do? Is it for torture or for... The last thing I have to talk about in general is the writing. Before, the story section was more of a matter of what was as a whole, and I don't want to pretend the previous games were an example of gaming narrative design, if you're looking to make a sneaky heist game. But I simply was not a fan of some of the elements. To me, the most egregious was Penelope. First of all, she's instantly back to her old antics, but instead of being the Black Baron, it's the Black Knight. But the reasoning is that she felt Bentley was held back by Sly. They could have been filthy rich if it wasn't for their morals, blah blah blah. Which is funny, seeing as Sly 3 ended on the gang being left the entire Cooper vault. It felt weird for a character who is meant to be incredibly smart, not be smart. I also found it weird that the only real nod to Murray's guru past is the little figure in the Binocucom and the necklace that took them to prehistoric past. What happened to that journey? Didn't he complete it? I do have to have some awareness, even in my favourite one of the whole collection, Carmelita instantly buying Sly's amnesia, or at least hoping, or Interpol forgetting about him, allowing them to live a life of peace in Paris. You could argue, if I accept that, I should be fine with this. It's just a little off for the lack of a better word. Last thing I'll cover is how they do mission briefings. It's no surprise, it's gone more digital. But the fact these happen outside of the safe house makes it feel less like the gang getting ready for a heist, with the classic slide changing and markers drawn over the top. Instead, it feels like I'm outside, but I'm on Discord, squinting at my screen to see what Bentley has hatched up. Functionally, there's no different, but the immersion, I feel, is significantly less. And sometimes, even after these lengthy briefings, what follows is a loading screen for many minutes. So if you weren't invested before, you won't be after that. Overall, my time wasn't wasted playing Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. I left that experience disappointed, but I'm still glad I gave it a go for myself to see, because nothing is more valuable than forming your own opinion. I will still be recommending the Sly series to all my friends who will listen, but this game, not so much. It's just that I hold the rest of the series in a much higher regard, so the whiplash I found a little jarring. I'm glad they kept the original cast of voice actors, because if it isn't broken, don't fix it. I found the gameplay a little worse, the story worse, and one sin this game committed was never allowing me to play as the coolest ancestor from Sly 3, Slyton Carmoon. This was the last time Sanzaru worked on the Sly Cooper franchise, with the potential DLC not being made or released. They still worked on other titles such as the God of War Trilogy for the PS Vita, the Sonic Boom games for the 3DS, and some VR games. Something I didn't know was that they worked on the Year of the Dragon portion of the Spyro Reignited trilogy, which was enjoyed by many. Their focus definitely shifted more to VR, with their more prominent games being the Asgard Wrath game, which had done so well they got acquired by Meta and even released a sequel. Both games critically were received very well, but unfortunately this is the last we'll see of them, as it was this year, in January 2026, it was announced that Sanzaru Games was shut down. They clearly had a passion for the industry, and it's always a sad day to see another dev house gone for good. Since the release of Sly Thieves in Time, the series has been in a really weird state, with no games being announced or teased. There was a movie trailer though, in 2014, slated for 2016. Then it was turned into a TV show, announced in 2017, with the hopes of a release of over 20 episodes in 2019, and the remainder coming out in 2020. Yes, that's a lot of numbers. That status, to this day, is unknown, and any information on the official sites is gone. Looking into it, I found another TV show titled Sly Cooper, Rise of the Legendary Thief, with the progress according to Pro IMDb set as filming, but that was October 2024. We'll have to wait and see for that one. And there are some much better comprehensive breakdowns on YouTube of the Sly movie trailer. During an interview with MinMax, Nate Fox was asked the following.
So one time you got a fan letter from a little kid who was saying that
if we stop making Sly Cooper games, we might lose business.
Do you want to dunk on that child and tell him that he's wrong?
Hey kid who missed us making more Sly Cooper games, I hope you enjoy Ghost of Yotei.
Hypothetically, if you had like an all-hands meeting at SuckerPunch tomorrow, and you said, next game, it's a new Sly Cooper, what percentage of the studio would say, yeah?
10%?
What?
It's been a long time, Ben, since Sly Cooper has come out.
This statement made the rounds, and some more negative than others. It should go without saying that what Nate said wasn't meant to be taken in that way, especially how this article phrased it. It simply means time has passed. They were a small team back then. Citing from another article, SuckerPunch even tried to remain under the 40 staff number. So even if every single member of the team stayed to this day, you would have less than 25% of your team be former Sly devs. However, it's been 21 years since SuckerPunch worked on Sly Cooper, and time moves on. Brian Fleming, in an interview with VGC, said it best when it came to the studio and its one project system. The truth is, whatever we do next, whether it's continuing Ghost or going back to Sly, the decision is really more limited by, again, our cherishing of focus and time to iterate, which means that we can only really do one thing at a time. If we were good at juggling 4 projects, yeah, we'd have a remaster. Let's go do one of those, and one of those, and do some fan requests. That would be really popular. But we only get to do one thing, so it kind of has to be your best idea, right? And that's really clarifying. It's not like there aren't 15 good ideas, but you only get to do one. And by the way, you only get to do one about every 5 years. So that choice is really important. I mean, that is choosing your college and your major every 5 years. That's a really big decision, so you better think carefully about it. And there you have it, folks. I'm sad in some ways because the chances of a new Sly adventure are slim. But I equally adore the Ghost franchise. The fact is, the way this studio is run is awesome. High staff retention. Even kids of the developers end up on staff. Whatever game or franchise they work on, it will most likely be a sight to behold. And I think it's more important to remember something coming to an end isn't always sad, because the memories we formed along the way are still there. I know I will form a whole new set of those when I make my future kids play them, or even a couple friends, which I did during the writing of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out previous complicated history, which was centered around the Star Wars Battlefront series. These videos take me a long time due to other jobs and priorities in my life. But releasing it makes it all the more rewarding. And go check out the Patreon, because the more of you that are there, the more likely I am to do this more often. Subscribe, check out the Patreon, like, comment, or don't. I'm not your dad.